Hi guys, and welcome back to the Spooky Cinema. For today's discussion, we are going to go into the new Terrifier 3 that is directed and written by Fear not, my friends, I will not give any spoilers in the coming footage that you're about to watch. I do welcome every horror fan to watch any movie that they're interested in, rather than only take my word for it, but let's dig into it, shall we? So first and foremost, I am going to tell you ahead of time that my rating for this movie was a little bit unusual. And the reason for that is because the subject matter is a little unusual. So if you've seen either of the Terrifier movies or the All Hallows Eve or even the Ninth Circle, which was where Art made his first appearance, then you'll know that these movies are kind of in a league of their own. They are not your average horror film, and really to rate them in comparison to other horror movies just kind of seems out of place. But I will rate it, and I will give you the reasons why and kind of how I came to my rating, so that way you understand, and also give you some of the factors on whether I feel you should watch it in theaters, and whether I think you might be better off watching it at home, depending on where you are as a viewer, as far as if you're a tenured horror fan, if you like the Terrifier movies, or if you're new to the Terrifier or Art the Clown in general. So stay tuned. And for a side note, I do highly recommend actually watching this YouTube video by Dead Talk Live, which is an interview with Damien. It actually is very eye-opening and helps you to understand the person who's behind Art the Clown and the Terrifier franchise. So that way you kind of have a behind-the-curtains look at exactly what kind of a mind came up with all of this. Because if, like me, you kind of are on the fence about, I don't know what kind of person really thinks of this stuff up, you're not alone. And this video is really eye-opening. It tells you more into what this person is like. For example, he talks about how he's just a laid-back guy, and his favorite band is actually Fleetwood Mac, of all things. So he is kind of a chill person and a lover of horror movies since childhood, which is many of us, me included. So I kind of can't judge him for that. Also, he is someone who is very much into special effects, and that's something that he kind of started his career off of. So that kind of explains also a lot of why there's so much gore in these movies, is because that's kind of what he was most excited about when it came to doing these movies on his own, or when he started his career. So it just kind of helps you to understand more of the why behind the whole franchise. So I would highly recommend watching that, and I will link it here. Now, are you the type of person who likes a lot of good subject matter, storylines important to you, details and how they are summed up in the plot of a movie, pacing, as well as the cast being like A-list? If any of those things sound like you, then these movies are probably not for you. I say that with the utmost respect for Damien and for the cast of these movies. It's not that they aren't good in that sense, it's just that those are not the strong suits. The biggest draw for me as a fan of Art, which, if you've seen any of my other videos, or if you haven't, I definitely like the character, and I like all of the merchandise that has come out of these movies. I think that some of the dark humor moments from Art the Clown are epic. And I have no shortage of things that will show you that in my household, as you can see. I really appreciate that this character in particular brings a lot of random dark humor, and for those parts of it, that's really why I watch these movies. The draw is not anything other than that. It is really simply the fact that I like Art the Clown, and I like some of those dark humor moments. And while I love Art the Clown himself and the dark humor that he brings to the genre, I can tell you that storyline is definitely not why I watch these films. I would also not recommend anyone watch these films unless you have seen the first two movies, because these aren't really your average horror movie, and honestly, the plots aren't strong as they are, on their own. They're definitely not standalone. And if you haven't seen the first two, then there's a lot that you're not going to understand. It's going to just make it even more confusing. So I highly recommend you see those if you have not already seen them yet. So this third installment of the Terrifier franchise basically just kind of jumps in from where the last one ended. And I won't go into that because, again, if you haven't seen them, I don't want to spoil anything for you, but it definitely picks right back up from where the first one ended. I wasn't sure if they would explain exactly how there was even anywhere to go from the last one to this one, but they definitely do a good job of kind of picking that up and showing you exactly how things kind of went together. Does it make sense? That's debatable. But does anything really make sense in most horror films? Probably not. So if you're looking for storyline and all of those things and for everything to make perfect sense, horror is probably not your bag anyway. It's probably not the genre that you like the most anyhow. And that's for obvious reasons. Horror really isn't supposed to make perfect sense. It's really just supposed to be for the adrenaline rush, the shock, the awe, and the overall kind of Halloween ambiance that it provides. At least that's kind of how I feel about it. I don't really go into any horror movie necessarily looking for a super in-depth plot line or for it to all make perfect sense, but I especially know not to look for anyone to have good judgment, just because, I mean, honestly, if someone had good judgment in these movies, then there really isn't a movie to be made in general, because someone who has perfect sense and makes all the right decisions is probably not going to end up in some of the situations that these people end up in. So let's just be real about that. So on that topic, the gore in this movie. So like I mentioned before, to understand more about Art the Clown and why these movies kind of have the overall conceptual visuals that they do, is that Damien Leone is very much into, you know, the old school special effects and visuals, and for that reason I think is a part of why there's so much gore in these movies. Thankfully, it's clearly not intended to be super realistic, which I appreciate. I think if it was, I probably could not handle watching these movies at all, because there's some scenes that are just incredibly intense and really uncomfortable. And that's another thing that you do find out in that interview, is that that's kind of his goal. He's always looking for more shock value and something bigger and more off-putting to put in the next one. So if you're not going in with that mindset or that knowledge off the bat, then these movies are probably going to just offend and disturb you, and you won't really want to watch them all the way through, or you just won't understand the why behind any of it. So that being said, these are not at all for the faint of heart, the easily triggered, or if you dislike the sight of blood or open wounds or any of those kind of squeamish moment type movie scenes, because these are those put on steroids. So all of those awful, nightmarish things, that's kind of this director and writer's whole bread and butter. He wants to take those worst aspects of, you know, the genre and kind of magnify them. So if that's not something that you're into, then just know this is what this movie is. I, for one, am not someone who's incredibly squeamish, but these movies certainly make me uncomfortable and definitely disturb me in a way that other movies don't. So that should tell you something. And just to kind of give you a comparison, which is the closest one I can make to something that's more box office or well known, is the Evil Dead movie made in 2013. That one to me is about the closest disturb level that I can get to this one that you would probably have seen before if you're a horror fan. And there are some scenes in that movie that I still have trouble watching no matter how many times I've seen it. And if you've seen it, you probably understand why. So just know, comparison-wise, that is the closest I can tell you that I can get to something that's about as disturbing as this one is. There are several scenes in this movie that had me questioning whether I should have just waited to watch the movie at home release, whenever it comes out on a streaming service or whatnot, because I just felt level 10 uncomfortable and disturbed at some of the scenes. And trust me, I knew full well what I was getting into, but there were still some scenes that were tough for me to deal with, especially, like I said, being in a theater where there's people around and you can't really just have a full-on discussion with the person that you're with, which to me is probably one of my favorite parts about watching horror movies at home with my husband, is that we can, pause, we can say what we want, we can stop it all together and decide to watch something else if we, have the need. But I think that with something this outlandish or this level of anxiety riddled thrill watch, I guess is how I would put it, it kind of was like the equivalent of going on a roller coaster you've never been on, or going into a haunted house you've never been to for the first time. That kind of level of anxiety, you don't really know what to expect, aren't sure how you're gonna feel about it, but it's already too late because you're already strapped in, you've paid your money, you're sitting there. And I'm one of those that if I paid for the movie, I'm probably going to just watch it all the way through and then complain later. So yeah, I just kind of had that feeling about it that, oh man, I may have made a mistake. But I mean, I don't entirely regret watching it. It's just that I do feel that I probably would have had a better experience had I watched it at home, had I been able to pause, talk to my husband about it, maybe even fast forward through some scenes because they were just a lot for me personally. But, you may feel differently, but that's just kind of how I felt about it. And just as an example, there was a lady with her teen daughter that were sitting next to me and my husband during the movie, and her and we both made kind of eye contact with each other several times during the movie when we were both kind of like, trying not to look at the screen or feeling a little outraged at what we're looking at. And it was kind of communicating, oh God, why, with our eyes without really saying it out loud, both cringing at the same time. So it's just one of those things where, because of the level of uncomfortableness with some of the scenes, that I really do feel this is a better at-home watch for some versus others. And again, I went in fully understanding that the writer would intentionally do worse possible shocking things to elicit reactions, as well as to one-up the last movie, because Terrifier 2 actually did, from what I've read online, better than expected, and that actually sparked a lot of studios to be interested in trying to partner with him in order to produce the third one in theaters. But because he has a very specific vision for these movies and likes the level of gore that he produces, he did not want to have to adjust any of that in order to make those deals happen. So he is self-produced on these movies, which, I mean, I can definitely respect that. That is something that I think is rare these days, is to see someone who does have a unique idea and then believes in it so much that they're willing to kind of stick their own neck out for it. Kind of reminds me of Sylvester Stallone and how he really wanted to play Rocky, and definitely made it a point to not, go with anyone who wasn't going to allow him to do that, and it actually ended up making his career. So I do appreciate stories like that, but there are some instances that I did feel went a bit far for my comfort zone. I know that's his point though, so because of that, I understood. But I will say I wasn't personally a fan of the Victoria character being so much more involved in this film. She was kind of like a sidekick to Art the entire movie and had a whole lot of dialogue, and I just think that was kind of part of why I loved this character so much, was because he doesn't speak and he does bring so much personality without having to say anything, and her kind of character bogarting a lot of that just kind of got annoying to me. I don't know how you will feel about it, but I really didn't care for that aspect of it. In the second movie, Terrifier 2, there's a character called Little Pale Girl. She looks kind of like a demon little girl version of Art the Clown. And that one isn't really as bothersome because she doesn't talk at all. So it's very similar to Art in the sense that there's no words. She's just incredibly creepy and off-putting, all by just, being present and by the things that she does. And it kind of just helps magnify Art's insanity and twistedness. In this third film, Victoria's character only felt like I said, like an annoyance who added like unnecessary vulgarity at times to several scenes that I really just found hard to watch, versus it actually making me excited about the character. In fact, the best scenes I thought involving Art were the ones that he was alone and kind of doing these random goofy, very creepy things that he does in the other films. And that just kind of further confirmed for me that the addition of Victoria is where things kind of got sour. I feel like maybe one, maybe two scenes with her in it would have been enough if they really wanted to have her character in the plot, but to have her kind of take over almost the entire segments with Art just felt to me like too much. And a funny random side note, I actually thought there were moments where when Art was wearing the Santa hat and had the little white wig, ringlets and everything, and he's doing these reactions to overhearing, a conversation that's going on about him, they actually reminded me a lot of the I Love Lucy episode where she mimics Harpo. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. If you're not, definitely go check it out. Basically, she just has this very slapstick and exaggerated way of acting with her facial features without any words, and because also that show's in black and white, it just very much was reminiscent to me of that scene. So I'm not sure if they intentionally kind of wanted to mimic that or if it just kind of was a happy coincidence, but it just definitely reminded me of a dark humored version or of that episode of I Love Lucy, and I just kind of chuckled about that. And then later on my husband actually mentioned it to me that he also had the same thought, so that's why I wanted to mention it here. If you have watched the movie and you actually picked up on the same thing, let me know in the comments. So here I'm going to go over the overall positives of the movie to me, and then the overall cons in my opinion, so that way you kind of can take those as you will, and then go forth and either watch the movie in theaters or wait, however you want to do it. So there's a couple of positives, of course, and that's, I think, something I do with every movie. I'm always going to look at the positives because I know just how much work is going into these types of productions, especially when, like I mentioned before, this is someone who is self-producing these movies to ensure that their vision, kind of comes to fruition. So the overall cinematography has gotten better, just like from the first one to the second one. There's definitely an improvement there, and the actor playing Art still completely knocks his performance out of the park. I really enjoy that aspect of it. I think that the way that his facial expressions and all of those things during some of these scenes, they just really add personality without a single word being said, and that says a lot about his acting abilities. They also still managed to give him lots of dark humor parts, which I appreciate because honestly that is my favorite aspect of Art the Clown. And speaking of that, they also have made definite improvements to his overall look. I feel like every single movie, the costume, especially Art's face, definitely get more detailed and slightly more sinister and a little scarier if you ask me. So I think those things are always cool to pick up on. Now let's get to the cons. So the storyline still feels a little underdeveloped and confused. This one's ending to me made even less sense than the previous two and was incredibly anticlimactic in my opinion, considering the kind of slow buildup that the movie takes to get there. It definitely feels like a lot of plot points didn't really add enough to justify their being in the film or their inclusion, and it feels like a whole lot of ideas kind of got loosely strung together, whether it made sense or not. Some form of maybe leaning further into dark humor rather than the sick or twisted, that would definitely help draw more people into this character, because I think that there is definitely something to Art that makes him so beloved by the horror community. I mean, obviously me included, but I think that the positives and the things that we like so much about Art aren't really magnified as much as they should be, and there's more emphasis put on the things that I think really aren't as important at this point because of the fact that there's already a fan base there, and if you expound on the dark humor, then that might kind of help break things up. So overall, if you've seen any of my movie reviews, there are a couple of standard tests that I kind of go into in each of my reviews, and here they are. So the trailer test is the first one that I do, and this one basically is just to say whether or not I feel like the trailer sold me on something completely different than I got in theaters. So for me, I do feel like this one, it didn't deliver as much as I wanted it to based on the trailer, so I do feel like it failed. I think that the lack of good storyline and it banking more on the draw for fans who already love Art the Clown so much kind of just drew you in with these trailers, it just made the trailer feel better to me than the overall movie was. If anything, I think for horror fans, the negative propaganda that they have been putting out about, people vomiting and leaving the theaters and these exaggerations of how people are reacting to this movie kind of worked as a reverse psychology type deal for most people who might just have let curiosity get the best of them. So another thing that I note about movies is the balance. For balance, I'm looking at if it's a scary movie, is there a good flow to it? Did it feel too dragged? Was it too slow? Was there enough action or anything like that to keep it moving? The pacing to me felt off, like a good portion of the beginning probably could have been axed entirely, pun intended. And that includes Victoria's parts, like a good chunk of them. I think it would have helped it to not feel as drawn out or long. Also, if more jump scares had been added in, at some places, there was at least one I know that definitely got me, and I was hoping that kind of carried on throughout, but it didn't. So I really feel like that probably could have helped to kind of smooth out the pacing issues. Another test is the husband sleep test. As far as that goes, this is basically just if you bring someone who, it's kind of heads or tails whether or not they're going to stay awake during the movie. That's kind of how my husband is. So for this one, it was definitely a pass on that because this movie has so much gore and anxiety-riddled scenes that there's just no way that you could fall asleep during this, even if you're watching it late. So just know if that's the case, you'll likely stay awake for it. Would I rewatch or buy it when it comes out on home release? So I definitely think I would buy it, and the main reason is because I already own the other two, so I would add it to the set to make sure I complete my set, but also because I know that I would enjoy the experience more watching it at home because, like I mentioned before, I can pause, I can stop, I can forward, and I can just kind of skip to other parts if I want to. If that's the case, I think that I would, and I anticipate that they will make some sort of kind of a box set that comes out on this, since I know they made actual VHSs of part 2, which I did end up getting. But they did already announce that they will be making a Terrifier 4, so we'll see how that goes. Now the biggest question. Would I recommend that you go and watch it in theaters? The overall answer to that is no, but I do have caveats to that. I would say because of storyline, I would rate this one a 3 out of 10, but then because I know that the overall goal is to shock, disgust, and basically just surprise the heck out of you, for that, 10 out of 10. So when I average those two together, it's about a 6.5 overall rating for me. And if you're a big fan of the other two films and you would rate those at least a 6 or higher on that scale out of 10, then I think that this is absolutely one that you will want to go see and then later, of course, buy. If you're in the category of people who only liked the other two movies, not necessarily loved them, but you do really like Art the Clown himself as a concept, or maybe like the concept art or the merchandise, kind of similar to how I do, then in those cases, I would say your best bet is to wait for home release, just because there are some really intense moments in this movie, definitely some triggering scenes, I'm sure, for a lot of people that you're going to want to be able to pause, forward, and kind of consume it at your own pace. Now, for everyone else in the general public who hasn't seen the first two films, isn't sure how they might feel about this whole franchise, and honestly maybe even get squeamish or uncomfortable with clowns or with Art the Clown's visual concept at all, I would say don't see it in theaters. Instead, try watching or streaming either of the first two films and kind of see how you feel about those, and maybe even just wait till it's free on a streaming service so you can kind of try your luck and see how you feel about it. I know for me, it definitely took a few watches of the first couple movies before I really understood or really let Art the Clown kind of get to me, I guess is what I would say. And also getting to know Damien Leone's story makes a big difference on how you feel about the overall concept of these films. That's why I say if you don't know anything about it, don't want to know anything about it, are just creeped out in general, or just kind of generally curious but don't know how you might feel about it, then you probably won't like it anyway, so you might be doing yourself a favor by just skipping out on this one. Because like I mentioned, this one was a lot, even for me who has seen hundreds of horror movies. If you've already seen this movie and loved it or think entirely different from me, that's entirely okay, and I am absolutely glad if you did, and I would love to hear from you in the comments on what you loved about it, what made it great to you. And also remember always that I welcome anyone who wants to see a movie to do exactly that, regardless of outside opinions. Do exactly what you want to do. Ultimately at the end of the day, it's your life, your time, your money, and you can choose to walk out of the film if you're outraged by something that you see. And if you happen to have the chance to circle back to my video, leave me a comment below to let me know how you made out on it, heads or tails, good or bad, what you thought. And whether you watch it or not, if you'd like to see more movie reviews that I have done or any of my movie lists, and click on the on-screen link that'll show up here now, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye guys.